Hello. Today, February 16, I'd like to talk about the international situation, especially in the Middle East. And I'd like to say a few words about the Donbass, or the Ukraine and the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, or from the point of view of the Ukrainian, might be oblast. Let's start with the Middle East. The present situation is very, very dangerous indeed. As we all know, the Russian Air Force is supporting very effectively and attacking and bombing the ISIS or Daesh and the other terrorist groups that are operating within Syria. And those terrorist groups, which are called by the United States and their allies moderate, of course they are a creation of them, they are, from the technical point of view, they're terrorists as well. Because they indulge in terrorist actions. Because we have to separate, which is a armed struggle with terrorism. Armed struggle is what is a confrontation with armed formations, might be irregular armed formations, and the government in a given country. That might be an armed struggle, armed warfare, guerrilla warfare, if you wish to imply, to call them like yes, guerrilla warfare. Sometimes might be a direct confrontation. Well, in the case of Syria, they're terrorist organizations, and the legitimate power is the government power. Well, having said that, the present situation is very dangerous because it seems that the Syrian armed forces, the army, Syrian Arab army, and the independent battalions, and their help with Hezbollah and Iran, and with the important, I might say that decisive in this instance of the Air Force, of the Russian Air Force, in combination with the ground troops, they are advancing and defeating their enemies. And the thing is that they are approaching, they're almost taking Aleppo, which was under terrorist control, or opposition forces, and they are encircling that city, and they're approaching to the Turkish borders. Now, Turkey is ambivalent position, because as they said, I always base on open sources. I don't have any particular information to say. By the way, all the commentators of international geopolitics or on politics, they always try to pretend they have a special information and things like that. Well, I base myself in open sources which are the enormous quantities and of course of varied quality. But then we have to use our common sense. The dangerous situation is because Turkey, with the government of Erdogan, which is pro-Islamist, and this is, I'd like to comment on this particular country because after being under the government of military and secular governments, with the triumph of the Islamist orientated parties directed by Erdogan and his associates, they have an ambiguity in the international relation. Their main enemies for them are the Kurds. The Kurds within Turkey, the Kurds in Iraq and in Syria, because they claim they are a nation without a state. Now, the Kurds in Turkey, they are about close to 20% of their population, perhaps a little less. Then we have the Kurds in the Syrian part. And Iraq, they are almost independent. Their concern is with the Kurds, not with the Islamists, not with the Daesh or ISIS, whatever. Of course, we all know that they are sort of Frankenstein, that no one can control them. I mean, applying limited resources, because the hegemonic power, the United States alone, can defeat them if they win, but they have to go with troops, with land troops, with land power. And that might not be very popular in the United States, and especially in a year which is an election year for president, which marks the international relation from the point of view of the elections. There are some constraints to what are they going to do. I like to add to this that the population, the gross population, the great majority, I think they are tired of war after war after war. But of course there are two sides from this problem, because on the other hand there is a world sort of religion. It's a complex subject in the United States, in this particular area. But in this period of primaries and then general elections, I don't think the president, the actual President Obama, might launch a full-scale invasion. I don't think so. They will try to control it, and then empires sometimes win, sometimes lose. The objective of the empire is to be in the first. They might lose, they might win. They lose, but even if they lose in this instance, that doesn't mean that they're losing the power. They are losing this let's say, tactical of battle in this area, what they call the central command, area of responsibility. So it's not something existential threat like some Israeli politicians like to talk about always, about their existential threat. Well, it's not an existential threat. This is an existential threat for the Syrians themselves, that already, according to the last information of United Nations, almost, they used to say about 250,000. Now they're saying about 470,000. 470,000 people who happen to die, and about 2 million wounded, and 11 million displaced in a country of, and poverty in a country of 22 million. This catastrophe. And of course there are about 3 or 4 millions, 2 million I think, from Syria that are emigrating to Europe. So that's the catastrophe. That's a human catastrophe. And I always think about all those people. They're suffering that much. How can we measure the pain of so many people? How can we measure? We have measures for everything. We have measures for living standards, gross domestic product, Gini index, happiness index, you name it. We can measure. There are many universities that specialize in different topics. So, which is a very interesting. It's a very interesting way of reading how a country is, because we have to rely on statistics, officials and unofficial statistics. So in order to have a better understanding of a given country or problem. Having said that, the dangerous thing is that in the few days Saudi Arabia and Turkey are saying that they might launch a land incursion. They've been talking about the no-fly zone, the area of control, but those things are very dangerous because Russia and Syria, of course, they will oppose it. Now, in the last few days, the artillery from the Turkish side, they've been shelling position of the Syrian army. And the difficult thing and the dangerous thing is that if they tried to launch an incursion and approach the Russian Air Force base, and they might be in very difficult position, the Russians. And I don't want to think about the NATO attacking Russia, because that might be sort of I would say a world war. I think so. I think I said a month or so ago that I hope Russia will not allow a Dien Bien Phu. But I never had in mind that Turkey and Saudi Arabia, they might take that very, very dangerous step. Probably is a sort of bluff. Probably. But who knows? There are about 18,000 troops close to the border. And this is the situation. There are, of course, there are diplomatic agreements, but those are each side are trying to gain time. One, because they are in not a very strong position, and the other one because they don't like to put themselves like they don't want to have some sort of agreement. My impression is that Russia will like to have some sort of agreement, a transition. They already said that, a transition government, but it has to be voted by the Syrian people, of course. The parties will never agree on this, because what they want, the United States, what they want is the full control or the full chaos. And the opposition forces, those are sort of a melange of a group of exiles, like happened after the war in Iraq, like happened after the war in Afghanistan. So there are people who have been living abroad or working in international companies, and all of a sudden they turn to the political arena, as the Americans like to say. And of course they are brought to that because there is a big incentive to regain the power they lost decades ago. But that's the way things are. It seems that a military solution, short-term solution, it might be approaching. It's a short-term solution because this is an area of instability. And the Arab world, like the Turkish state, the Turkoman world, because they have influence in the Central Asia, and the Persian or Iranian, there are three different worlds, but they have to live side by side. They've been there since ever. I mean, not the Turkish. The Turkish, they were the latecomers. They came to the region from Central Asia, but 1,000 years ago. Not 1,000 years, but more than 1,000 years ago. Nevertheless, it's a very complicated, let's call it chessboard, in which there are no winners but losers. The losers are the people. The people, really the people. And they paid a very high price. And let's see what the next few days will bring about, what will be the next move. Of course, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, they won't do anything against the will of the United States. Of course, they have their interest. They have their interest, especially Saudi Arabia. But Turkey, it has its constraint as well. Turkey is a member of NATO. Is in close relation with the European Union. So it cannot do anything very lunatic. But since humans are unpredictable, anything might happen. If we think about logic, well, the logic tells us that they might do some bluff or things like that, but then in the last instance they might retreat. Who knows? But since I'm talking about the human suffering, the problem is, what are they going to do with so many refugees in Turkey, in Europe? Europe is showing that, well, there are very different contradictions in Europe, but of course they don't want the immigration, and much less from the Muslim world. We have to wait and see. Thank you.